Tandem Nomads, episode 66.
That there are people who need to hear this, and there are people who are battling with their own losses, whether it be a death of a beloved or any number of other losses, and they are aching to know how one survives it. How do you go on, and how do you eventually become a woman who can do an interview and laugh and dance and go running with your dog through the forest? How does that ever happen?
Welcome to Tandem Nomads, the podcast show for expat partners. Every new episode is launched twice a month on Tuesdays. You will find here great inspiration and tips to build your portable career and thrive with your family in your global nomadic life. Hello Nomad Nation, this is Emel Deregi. Today's episode is a little bit special for many reasons. The first reason is that it's the second part of the previous episode. So we started last week talking with Melissa Dalton-Bradford, who is a global entrepreneur and a global mom. And in that episode, number 65, she shares with us her journey, how she managed to build an incredible portable career in over 20 moves around the world. So if you haven't listened to that episode, make sure to check it out. Melissa is a singer, she's an actress, but she's also an author. She has published a book called Global Mom, a memoir, and also the book called On Loss and Living Onward. She spends, on top of that, a major amount of her time supporting refugees in Germany, providing German courses, but she also supports many other projects who are designed to help the refugee crisis in the world. So today's episode is going to be a lot about what she shares in this book, which is the tragedy of the loss of her son. So I wanted to bring to you this episode because I know that a lot of us might have experienced the loss of somebody we loved, and it's not always easy to manage it in normal life, but it's even more complicated when living a global lifestyle. I want you to bear with me a little bit today because this episode is probably the longest episode I've ever recorded. And it's also an episode that I decided to not edit because there were so many valuable and cherishable things that Melissa shares with us here that I really didn't want to cut off anything. But let me just tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk here so that you can know a bit more about it. So this episode is going to be for an hour. It's a bit like a documentary where Melissa shares in true honesty and in true vulnerability how she has been dealing with her family with the loss of Parker. And she did this with such humility. Honestly, I don't think there's anything worse that can happen for anyone than the loss of a child. So I really cherish what Melissa has been sharing with us. But she also gives us a lot of tips on how to help those who lost somebody. So we're going to have 4 parts in this episode. The first one is how she managed to deal with the loss of her son and how did her family deal with it. This is something very personal, so it's very hard to give advice on how to deal with because we're all different. But I think it helps to hear somebody else's perspective, and we're very lucky to have Melissa here to share with us so openly her experience with us, and I'm pretty sure that just relating with that feeling can help a lot. So the first part is about, how she dealt with it, and maybe something can help you or help any of your friends with that. The second part is how to actually help somebody who goes through grief, because it's not that easy to know what to do. So I thought a bit of guidance from somebody who has experienced that loss might be helpful. And the third part is about actually, if we did lose somebody, how to help our people around us do the right things for us. And it's not always easy to know what we need, but I thought it would be interesting and important to share, to help those who are experiencing loss to be able to express it with those who are around them, because there's so many miscommunications that can happen in this very, very difficult time. And finally, we'll also talk about the international aspect of losing somebody we love when living far from home and arriving in a country where we don't know anybody. How do we do that when we're broken, when we're hurt? And how do we share this with our new community when we just arrived somewhere? So really, really deep topic, a deep episode. I've never had to record such a sensitive and important episode, so please bear with me. I hope you will be able to go through the whole episode, or at least come back to it and listen to it in different pieces, as I believe that it can be really, really valuable to each of us on this earth, because we all have to deal at some point with this terrible feeling of loss. So I hope this will be helpful to you and to anybody around you. And please make sure to share with anybody who might, who this might help. So let's start now. We've been talking a lot about, spirituality and also having our life out there. And one of the major events of your life that you've been sharing with us is the loss of your son.
Yes.
So would it be possible to take us through it? And because there's not much ways to start this conversation that can be very sensitive. So you've been sharing a lot of your journey, and I don't know, what would you like now to share to start with?
Well, first I want to thank you for the tone in your voice. It's very sweet and tender. I can tell that your whole body language, if I could say so, has changed as you walk onto what I consider sacred ground. And that is a beautiful thing. That speaks of your depth. So thank you for that. I'm always grateful to have the opportunity to talk about this thing, which I believe is the most defining event or defining reality of our family's life, and for me as a mother. A number of years ago, in the middle of a major international move, and when we had sent our eldest child, whose name is Parker, off to university in the States, our family was in 4 different geographic locations. My husband was still in Munich, having overseen the legal details of the move for many years in Paris, and I had just arrived in the States to be there with our children who were entering summer camps, like so many of us do, who are Tandem Nomads. And then our oldest was going into college. And the first week of his university experience, he was involved in a tragic water accident where he was pulled into an invisible but lethal vortex, a whirlpool, he and another student, and then he was able to get out. Our son, who was a star athlete, was strong, and he was able to get out, and he went back twice to try to save the life of this other student. The other student survived, but our son did not. And right now, I'm looking out my window, and I'm saying to myself, you can keep it together, Melissa. You can keep it together as you talk about this. And so I always, just to let you know about the internal dialogue, I have to sort of hold myself together when I talk about this, because it is very tender. And but I want to share this story because I'm convinced now, after years of sharing this story in written form and in public settings, that there are people who need to hear this. And there are people who are battling with their own losses, whether it be a death of a beloved or any number of other losses, and they are aching to know how one survives it. How do you go on, and how do you eventually become a woman who can do an interview and laugh and dance and go running with your dog through the forest? How does that ever happen? So it's very complex, but to simplify it, after we turned off Parker's life support, I felt us catapulted to a new planet, not even just a new country, but a new planet. Mm-hmm. We felt alien on the earth. I felt like we couldn't even connect with anyone around us. My identity as a woman, this woman who had poured herself from the first day into the raising of her children, and this was my firstborn, so I had learned mothering with him. And this child who had also become my right-hand assistant when my husband was traveling so much. This was my sort of big boy that would carry the furniture up and down the stairs and who would help his brothers and sister across town on the metro in Paris. To suddenly have this child, this adult child gone, was an utter implosion of my life, and it really it destroyed my identity. I wondered to who I was and if I would ever go back to that woman who had been talking and writing and speaking and singing and hosting and managing international moves. I thought she was gone forever. I thought she was gone forever. I just couldn't imagine getting the energy back. So here we were, newly catapulted to this planet of grief and barely making it through our days. And you know what I did, Emel? I sort of applied the same skills to navigating that planet of grief as I had used to navigate every new country that we'd ever lived in. I went to the natives, right? I went right to the natives. So I hunted out people who had lost. I was constantly on the lookout, on the prowl for people who looked devastated and people who I knew had lost. I hunted out parents who had lost young adult males to tragic accidents. Just like when I had shown up in Paris, I hunted out people who spoke fluent French, people who were native to that culture. And so I hunted out the natives of the planet of grief. And I talked with them and I tried to find out from them. It's very much like when you move to a new country. You move to a new country and you feel like, am I the only absolutely idiotic, incompetent, crazy person here? I can't get anything done. And you talk with others and they say, no, you're not the only incompetent, idiotic, crazy person. We all felt that way. And when I talked with bereaved parents, they were saying, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, we also lost 15 kilos in a month, and we also couldn't talk, and we also wept until the capillaries in our eyes burst, and we also lost friends. Friends disappeared from off the face of the planet, and we never saw them again. And they were able to give me a sense of reassurance that what we were going through was, in fact, normal for someone who has moved to the planet of grief. And then I started learning the language of grief. People who have experienced cataclysmic loss kind of get together and they speak a shorthand with one another. And you can compare that to people like us who are tandem nomads or global nomads, and you can say, that first year, it's a tough one, right? Remember that first year when you're in a new country? Or, oh, registering in a new country. Or, oh, learning the cultural cues. Oh, and you had to do it in a new language. Or, oh, your children hated the school. You can get together with people who have a similar life experience, and they reassure you that it's what they've gone through also, and then you speak a sort of shorthand. And we experienced the same thing when we connected then with other people who knew about deep loss.
Yeah. I love the fact that you've been doing this so well, trying to take us right away from the tragedy that you've lived with your family to giving us right away some insights, on how you dealt with it. So thank you for that. And you mentioned a lot the importance of reaching out to people who have been through the same thing. And so what are the things that helps you most from what people have shared with you to not only deal with it as a mother, but you also had other kids to take care of that I'm sure went through the same grief too, and also a husband who must have been as devastated with this tragedy. So how do you do that? Well,
excellent question. How many hours do we have? I'm going to make you laugh here. Remember earlier in the first part of the interview that we talked about the factors that helped with all of the moves. And I said, there are three things. They are my family, my particularly my relationship with my husband, that's very grounding, a community, and then my spirituality. Well, it was those three things also that have been the decisive factors in our experience of, I will not say getting over, because you don't get over this sort of thing, or moving through is maybe closer to the reality, but I'll call it absorbing and adapting to. Absorbing this blow and adapting to a life where loss is omnipresent. Our community was utterly, utterly saving for us. Your community, and you'll find this in all of the literature about bereavement and adapting to a life with loss, is that the community is necessary. And why would that be? Community is necessary because the community is the framework in which you write the story of your life. And they know the past, they know the present, they're helping write your life into the future. You create your identity, again, that magic word that you like to talk about, and so do I. You create your identity in a matrix of relationships, which is why, to go back to our first part of this interview that I liked so much, that's why identity is such a troublesome issue when you're moving perpetually, because your identity is interrupted, and you have to create your identity over and over again everywhere you move. Well, with grief, the identity of the survivor is also challenged, but you have to remember it's the identity of the one who's lost, the reality of that life. This son of mine, who was this huge personality at his school in Paris, who was a big deal in our local community, he belonged to them too. They helped write his story, and he was a player in their lives, and they were players in his life. And so for them to continue to narrate the story of this boy was absolutely necessary. And it's why a community can do so much to help in the survival and adaptation process of the family. So they memorialize, and they continue to talk about him, and they ask questions, and they listen, and they show up, and they help. And they mourn with you, which is so obvious, you'd think, but sometimes in our communities, we're afraid to enter into these tender, very delicate, painful areas for a number of reasons. For a number of reasons. There are long lists of reasons why we don't, but we hold ourselves back. And in that holding back, we send the tacit message to the survivor, the bereaved, that their loss doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to us. That's, even though that's not what we feel, that's the message that we receive. Or if you show up in a room and you know that everybody in that room knew your beloved that's now gone, but they won't address it, right? We do that, don't we? We dance all around that very delicate, the flame of loss. We dance all around it, and we'll talk about the weather, we'll talk about politics, we'll talk about the latest thing in social media, we'll talk about steel-belted radial tires, we'll talk about Snooki's lip gloss, but we won't talk about the thing that everyone is sad about. And that also sends the message to the one who is gasping for breath that, you know what, we're already done with being sad. We want to move on to trivia. And that's very, very hard for the survivor. So I've mentioned that, number one, it was my relationship with my husband and with my family that helped us. We helped one another shoulder through this and bear it. Number two, it's this community. And then again, it's this spirituality. I dove headlong into a monastery, ML. I kind of went into this retreat and sought spiritual guidance because I thought, this is too big for any mortal to handle. There's got to be a bigger world that can help me through this. Definitely. And it's very much my spiritual self that gave me, that discovered strength and answers and guidance. And in the middle of the most, now I'm going to get emotional, but in the middle of the most impenetrable darkness, where I felt like I had an avalanche of weight on my chest so that I could hardly breathe, and where everything spoke death and decay, I saw glimmers and shards of light, and they were enough to keep me going. And that grabbing onto that light and following it and seeing hope and finding love and finding enough of it to just inch back out into re-engagement in the world and with others, that was saving. That was saving. That was saving for the family.
Mm.
So that's a long, long answer. And of course, we could talk for a long time.
There is so many. Thank you so much, Melissa. Before we go forward, I just want to thank you for sharing in such a sensitive way your pain and what has helped you to deal with it. And as you said, it never goes. And maybe it's not so bad that it never goes, because how can it go if you loved somebody so much? But it's dealing with it and continuing. Life has to go on, but it's not over. The pain cannot go over.
That's right.
You know, there's two important parts for me that you've been talking about. Is we started saying, how can we help those who are grieving? You know, how what has helped you and your family go through that grief? And you talked a lot about your relationship with your husbands, with your kids, the community, and the spirituality. And I guess you have to have some kind of also willingness to fight it, you know, to put the effort in getting better in dealing with it. And this is what I sense in what you've been doing, is putting that effort in getting better by investing in yourself, going to the retreat, and taking care of yourself. So this is important, I think, to highlight. The other thing, you know, we talk a lot about the community, how important it is. And I think it must be maybe, you know, 50% if not more of the grieving process is the community, the people around us who help us go through it. But we know that it's not easy for everybody to know what to say and what to do when somebody that we love has lost somebody they loved. So and in certain cases it makes people do certain things that can even be painful. You know. So I know that you mentioned we met at the FIGT, Family Global Transition in Amsterdam. And you mentioned some of the things that some people did when they tried to help you and that actually didn't help you. I would like to go through that and then focus more on the positive, on what have people done to help you, and what can you tell us of what we should do to help people who go through grief?
Okay, good. And I like the way you're structuring that we go through the negatives first, and then let's end on the things that are possible. Because we human beings are well-meaning. I'm an idealist, and so I just trust that everyone's trying to do the right thing. But wow, we come up with some doozies. we do some pretty crazy things. And I have to say, I am sure that before grief was my own planet, I did the same stuff. I'm sure. I look back and I just cringe and I think, I did number 1, 2, 4, 9, 12, and everything else down the list that was not helpful. But they're very key things in all of the literature that I have read. And again, that was part of my adaptation and integration to the land or the planet of grief, was that not only did I speak with people, live people that were natives, but I read a library of books about the experience of loss and adaptation. And the same sort of painful attempts at helping the bereaved come up over and over and over again. And here are just a few of them. We've already talked about remaining silent or pulling oneself away. When you see the bereaved in the grocery store and then you dip around into another aisle because you just don't want that painful, awkward encounter, that's very hurtful for the bereaved when they feel that they're avoided. A friend of mine who lost her beautiful 16-year-old daughter to a tragic ski accident said, I feel that I'm my own leper colony. Everyone is avoiding avoiding me. Either they're avoiding me, or number 2 on the list is that they ambush. People come and they storm the bereaved in an attempt to give quick fixes. So we can call it the bandage attempt, or the magnet for your kitchen refrigerator with some sort of platitude on it, and you want to slap it over this huge pain and then run away. So you get ambushed at first, and then people disappear. And very much that ambushing is accompanied by lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of talking. And we do that because we're nervous. We do that because we believe as human beings, if I just keep saying something, something's going to help here, right? Mm. And in that attempt, then we say sometimes very hurtful things. One grief therapist once said to me, quoting someone else, said, really, the best thing you can do is show up and shut up.
That's a good one.
Just show up. Just your physical presence, even if you're standing on the threshold of the door and you are dumbstruck. I had friends that did that. And just seeing them standing there and then look dumbstruck and at a loss, as awkward and as vulnerable and as stripped down as I felt, was strengthening for me, because I recognized in their dumbstruckness and in their awkwardness that they were also overwhelmed by this reality. It was too big for words. And sometimes silence is the very best language for huge loss. What words are there really that can get to the edges of a loss that feels bigger than the universe for you? So sometimes just showing up and just doing something. So that's something else I've learned, is that you can just show up and do something. Show up and take out the garbage. Take a child on the walk. Take the dog on the walk. Cut the grass. Do the dishes. Clean the windows. Leave a gift. Any of those practical things. I believe strongly that everyone, no matter how inept they might feel and overwhelmed in the moment when they hear about someone else's loss, they have a gift that they can give. They can do something. We have a very good friend, I'll just give you an example, who says himself, I've got 2 social neurons. I mean, he says, I'm just not really good socially. Mm. But he is a brilliant, not a brain surgeon, but he studies CAT scans. And so what did he do for us? He wasn't going to come and sit by our side and stroke our hand and weep with us, because that just wasn't him. But he read the brain CAT scans, and he sent us his professional, excellent reading of the CAT scans. So someone from that group can do that, and somebody else showed up to help us select a gravestone, and somebody else helped design the funeral programs because this person was gifted with design. So I'm going on and on here, just giving a list of the things that one can do, but the best thing is just to show up, shut up, and follow that deep inclination that I believe everyone has, a deep spiritual intuition that will say, do this, go now, say this, don't say that, step back, give this piece of music, bring these particular flowers. If you tune into that, then you can do a lot. The other thing that always comes up in literature is that, and because I'm a person of faith, because I'm a person who's engaged in her religion, I can speak with authority about this. Sometimes people want to use religion as some sort of a weapon, or as their quick go-to answer to tragedy. They want to talk all about God's will and how God needed that person and how that person's in a better place and how now you've got an angel. And people come with all sorts of platitudes, which I'm sure are well-meaning, but they drive people to rage. They drive people to rage. They drive the bereaved to great anger and resentment, and sometimes drive people out of their faith community completely, because They feel that somebody who hasn't wept and mourned with them is going to come and try and patch up this deep gash in their life with a scripture or two. And again, I have the right to say that because I'm deeply spiritual and religious. But those things don't help. They might, some of them might be even true. I don't know, but they don't help in the moment. What helps in the moment is showing up, weeping, mourning, doing something that you can help. And then here's the fourth thing I want to mention. Mm-hmm. Grief always, always, always outlasts conventional comfort. It always does. We might be thinking as onlookers of someone's grief that, hey, it's been a month, it's been 2 months, it's been 6 months, you should be back to normal, right?
Yeah.
This is a terrible, terrible fallacy and a terrible thing to even utter. And when we start putting timelines on other people's experience of agony, then we deny them the dignity and we deny them the reverence and we deny them the reality of their love. Because grief is not a sign of weakness and it's not a sign of a lack of faith. It is the flip side of love, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You know that. You know, you grieve because you don't grieve things that you haven't loved. You grieve things that you love deeply. Yeah. And it's not somehow pathological to be very sad or even dizzy and disoriented months and months after the fact. In fact, my lowest point in my grief was 19 months after we buried our son. It was 19 months. And it had had peaks, and I'd been up, and I'd been able to talk, and I'd regained my laughter, and I had smiled at some point. But something hit really hard at 19 months, and I went deep down into a dark place. And by then, everybody thinks that you're back to the old person you were, but you know this, don't you, Emil? You're never back to the person that you were before. No.
It's just like, having an arm or a leg cut off, and that arm will never come back. And it's like pretending that arm or their hand is back. You're supposed to use it.
Yes, and building on that wonderful metaphor, C.S. Lewis, the great Christian theologian and writer, has written about this. He says death is an amputation. Mm-hmm. And if we build on that, we think, what if somebody then came up to you and said, after you've had your arm hacked off without anesthesia, what if they said, what do you mean you can't play volleyball? Come, you used to play volleyball. Come play, be the old volleyball player. We really need you to play. And you feel, wait, you haven't even acknowledged that part of me is gone forever. I'm now different. And I'll have phantom pain in that limb. Mm-hmm. And I'll never be a person with two arms again, as long as I'm living, as long as I breathe. And so it doesn't mean that you want people to pity you or to exclude you from life, but just to recognize, that is her broken edge. Mm-hmm. She's broken. She's broken. And
that's so many. You're so talented, Melissa, talking of this. I don't know a lot of people who can share in such a way that it really brings, it helps us, as people who have lost, but also people who want to help. So thank you so much for those words. And I have more questions. So yes. I just want to summarize real briefly what you said now. Yes, the first thing is about, let's not avoid the person who lost somebody because we don't know how to talk with this person.
Right.
That's very important. The second one you said, just be there. And I would say, it's not about what we say, but it's a lot also about what we do. And just being there is also an action. Just being present and just giving a hug or being just seated next to the person without saying anything is an action. So it's not so much about what we say. If we don't know what to say, we shut up, like you said.
Yep. Show up and shut up.
I love it. Show up and shut up. And you've seen so many people around you who have used their talents to show you their compassion instead of words.
Amazing.
And this is amazing.
Yes, it is.
So if we want to help somebody, let's think of what are our talents that we can put in place to help that person. You talked about religion, how important it is to be spiritual, but also not use that as a weapon to try to comfort somebody, because we can use it, but maybe be careful with that, because that could actually have the reverse effect, because life feels so unfair at that moment.
That's
so
right.
Bringing up, that it was the choice of a superpower, a god,
right? Exactly.
It's not something I think a person who has lost someone right away is ready to hear.
No.
And you talked also at the end of the time, giving time, but also accepting that things will never go away. So let's not pretend that our friends who have lost somebody should just go back to who they were, because they will never go back to who they were.
No, right. And we wouldn't do the opposite. When someone has a child, do we say, you're going to be the same person before you have a child? No, it's a radical change. A radical change, again, in identity, in your place in the universe, where you're going to invest your emotions, and we wouldn't pretend that the same person then remains after the tragic loss of that child. No, things are changed, and for me and for my husband at least, we didn't want to go back to the people that we were before. We knew something radical had happened in the universe, in our little personal universe, and so we wanted this to affect a change in us. And because any kind of loss, death or not, gives us an opportunity to change. And here we go back to the first half of our interview, moving from country to country, from culture to culture, from role to role, also gives us an opportunity to change, right? And we can try and hold on to the person we were, and we can cling to it, and we can resent the change, or we can use these crossroads, even tragedy, not to exploit it for personal improvement or something. That's not what I'm saying. But to create life out of death. Yeah. I think that's the great challenge of all people.
Which you did today, and it's amazing how you have spent so much energy now on helping others who have been going through grief with your book and all the speaking engagements you have, and it's amazing how you found that energy to do it.
Well, I didn't have it at first, I'll tell you that much. I could barely, I have to admit, I could barely walk for a long time. It took a while. Like a physical injury, it took a while to gain my energy back. But here was the magic that I never knew of before. Here's the magic that is so obvious, and I'm sure that lots of listeners knew this better than I knew it then. But it is in extending oneself. It is in trying to, how do I put this so it doesn't sound like some very cliched Beatles song or something, but it really is in loving others, in trying to reach out and love others, that one then finds healing, if we're going to use that word, or one we love. So incrementally I had to step out and dare to try and love other people, love strangers, enter into their loss, enter into their pain. It was hard at first, because I'll just say I was very proud. I thought, whatever's happened in someone else's life, it is not as bad as the death of this child. I really believed that. But that's how egotistical it was. And many people write about that. They say, wow, there's nothing like the ego of the sufferer, because we think this is the worst thing ever to happen in the history of humanity ever. And I really felt that in my bones, until I met people who had lived lifetimes of abuse, people who had been beaten by their alcoholic fathers, people who were in deserts of marriages, people who had chronic illness. These were all things that were in my blind spots in my life. I knew about them theoretically, but it was not until my shutters were ripped violently wide open to the world of loss that I realized, hey, loss is what life is about. And you cannot stretch your arm out in a room without touching some iteration of loss. And that was a huge awakening for me. And so that's where I thought, I don't know anything about being raised by an abusive alcoholic father that locks you in a room for days on end. but I know something about hurt, and that's where I'll meet you. And that's where, in trying to love that person and help and give dignity to that person, that I felt strengthened. I felt somehow filled up. And that's why I get to this place where I am now. And I have to be careful in this part of the narrative, because I'm going to sound like I'm painting myself as a saint. Footnote, asterisk, I am not. Okay. But what I really love to do is I love to find people that are hurting. And this refugee crisis has just been, this has been it. It's been, number one, families on the move. Families on the move, and then people who have lost. Yeah. But it's a level that is exponentially beyond anything that I can even begin to touch. Yeah. And I can sit at a table with someone who, yes, has moved country, but it's been with a backpack on her back, and by the way, she walked 4,000 miles.
It's amazing.
From Syria to Germany, right? And in the process, saw people lose their lives, and has lost a child herself, and maybe a spouse, and half of her village. So I feel humbled. I feel humbled, honestly, to have any right to even talk with these people. And I stay quiet about my own experiences, because I feel like I just feel so small. I feel so small compared to these people that I'm working with.
It is amazing. So, it is amazing that you have that, again, groundedness to be able to see that way, because it takes a lot of, effort to come out of that pain and be able to see the pain of others. And I love how your narrative the whole time is about the concept of loss, no matter what it is, and helping people who have gone through loss and pain. And it doesn't necessarily mean the loss of a beloved one, but it can be the loss of so many things that, and especially in international life, we go through. This is could be another third part, but let's do that another time. But I love how you go around that. But one thing I wanted to touch on before I don't know how we're going to end this. I could talk to you for hours, but we've been talking a lot about how we can help. What helps a person who's grieving, and then how can we help a person who's grieving? But one thing I want to talk about is, how can a person who's grieving help others who want to help, and give them some signals of what they need? Because sometimes it does help to just know what could help others.
I know. Oh, you are intelligent. No one's ever asked me that question before, although I've wished that someone would. The onus really is on the griever to say what the griever needs. The problem's this. The griever is so incapacitated that the griever can't say. And also for me, and it happens to be the first line, or one of the first lines, of Joan Didion's marvelous memoir on loss called Year of Magical Thinking. She's one of the great American writers. She says, the question of self-pity. And we that have lost and have been reduced, have been liquefied, reduced to a powder also by loss, we're afraid to say, I need this and this and this, because it might be interpreted as, I need to stir up your pity. I need to stir up your grief. For me, I remember thinking, if you don't see that I'm bleeding to death here, I can't tell you what to do. But right now, for the sake of our interview, I can give some hints. I can give some hints. It's good to have someone else that sort of runs interference for you when you are in the early throes of grief. If you can have someone that says, please don't visit their home. Or give them about a week just to learn to breathe again. Or, you know what they really need? They need A, B, C, D, E.
Basically you're saying it's good to find somebody, the person who's in grief, to find somebody they trust enough to become a bit their agent. I'm sorry for the term, but I can't think of a better one right now.
It's an excellent term.
Of somebody or in between, to be able to guide the people who want to help and make sure that they help them the right way.
An agent, an intermediary, somebody who is there just to say, I understand what they need. Call me and I'll filter. That sort of thing. That helps. Otherwise, we have to learn to be able to say the words, I need this, or say, I'm hurting, or be able to identify what really is going on. I feel confused, or I'm feeling sick, I'm feeling weak. Somehow we have to learn how to say those words. The ideal time to learn how to say them is before tragedy ever hits. So that's a whole nother skill set, is to be able to actually communicate what it is that we're feeling. But when you're in grief, it's such a whirlwind of feelings you don't even know. You don't even know. What one very wise woman once told me, who had also lost a son and was a social worker by profession, was, you need to protect yourself and protect yourself and protect yourself for a long time. And then when you get the feeling that it's time to push, then you push. And then you go out, and then you're able to articulate a little bit better where your boundaries are, what you can do, what you can't do, what you need. But at the beginning, it's really, you're protecting yourself because you're skinless at the very beginning after major loss.
You're naked.
You're naked. You're naked. And, gosh, maybe it would be helpful if people sort of were able to write down what they need. Sometimes we can't say it, but I would write down things, and then I would pass those emails on to other people and just say, please tell other people, this is how we're doing. This is what I'm feeling. Yeah. I was able to write things better than I was able to speak.
Yeah, that's a great advice. But let's not forget also that sometimes, I'm not an expert, but my feeling is that we also don't know what we want. And it's okay to say it, because it's such a huge tornado that the first weeks, the first months, that it's hard to know what we need. So it's also okay to say, I don't know what I need, but for the moment, this is the space I need, this is the things I need, and sometimes we also change our minds.
Yes.
So I think
from hour to hour.
From hour to hour. So I think the important, I think that's where the collaboration and the love comes in surfing together as a griever and the family or the friends around to try to find that balance, I think, because there's no right or wrong at the end of the day, although today we're trying to give some clues. It's all about love, isn't it?
Yes. And something that comes to mind right now that I've learned over the process is that grief and forgiveness are inseparable partners. You're going to have to forgive, and you're going to have to ask for forgiveness. And that's on many, many different levels. But even if we were to precede our comments, if we're on the helping side, if we're the onlooker, we're trying to help someone who's a survivor of loss, if we said first, please forgive me for what I'm going to say, or please forgive me before I even start doing anything. I know I'm going to make mistakes. Please, will you forgive me? Mm-hmm. And then if we also, as the grievers, say, please forgive me if I throw a sofa through the wall, or please forgive me if I suddenly break down in tears in the cereal aisle of the grocery store. Please forgive me if I seem disoriented. Please just forgive me, because then we're going to give each other, on both sides of the equation, we're going to give each other bandwidth to be absolutely human.
Yeah.
And human means we're going to be imperfect. And it also then opens up the door for us to forgive one another. And we get our hearts in a position where we say, yeah, our neighbor's going to say something kooky, and our pastor's going to say something self-righteous, and our great aunt is going to say something way out there, and our neighbor's not, and our sister's not going to say anything, but we're going to forgive them. Mm-hmm. Because you have to, as a griever, you have to forgive quickly, because you can't get well if you're carrying, on top of grief, you're carrying the burden of resentment and anger.
So important. I love that you bring up this.
Oh my God. Well, I can only say it because, hello.
Yeah, very important.
It's my story. I could not, and my husband couldn't either, I could not move forward with this ball and chain of anger, resentment, even rage holding me back. Mm. The way to healing is love and openness and softness and suppleness, not rage And it's really easy to get caught in that rage vortex for a long time. You can get stuck there for years and years and years and never come out.
Such an important message here, the forgiveness part, asking for forgiveness before, during, after, and from both sides, and accepting to forgive. And this is such an important message. Thank you for that one. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to talk briefly of the international aspect of it that I'm sure makes it even more complicated. Is there any insight you want to share about that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's a big deal, at least in our story. The international aspect goes back to this idea of community. We were in the middle of a move, as I've mentioned, from a long-standing community in Paris to a brand new world when we were also catapulted to the planet of grief. So no one in the new place where we lived knew our story. No one knew when we showed up in public that we had holes shot through our torso. So that was one of the complicating factors on one hand with our experience with loss, was that we didn't have a community on hand. On the other hand, it then showed us the beauty of the greater international community at the funeral of this beautiful son that took place in the Rocky Mountains of the United States. There was a chapel full of people that flew in from Norway, France, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Singapore, Japan, all over the United States, because they were our community, and they showed up. They came to honor this boy. So while we didn't have a geographic locus where we moved into Germany that knew our story and therefore could grieve what they had also lost in this boy, we had this international community that did. And that international community has been necessary. Now, for those of our listeners that are living in wherever area it is on the planet, and someone shows up in your community fresh from loss, what do you do? Yeah. What do you do? Because they're a stranger, right? This person is a stranger. And there might be people that show up in your midst and you have no idea that they are shot through the torso. But you might find out later in the process. What can you do? Well, I can give you some examples. Even strangers can do incredibly beautiful things to help one another. Marvelous, tender things. If the woman at the dry cleaners can staple a little handwritten note on the plastic wrapping around the black funeral suits of our sons, a little note that says, "I don't know you, but I'm praying for you in your loss." And that to this day, almost 10 years later, I saved that handwritten note. It was like a boost. It was like a shot of oxygen for me. Strangers can do that sort of thing. You don't have to impose yourself, but you can say in so many words, "I know, and I'm sorry, and I'm with you. And if at any time you want to talk with me, I will make myself available. We'll go on a walk. I'll share some beautiful music with you. There's this book that I read. Maybe it will help." Those sorts of things. Strangers can enter in to one another's lives in tender, knowing ways and say something like, "I can't know what you're experiencing, but because I know a little bit about my own experience with loss, I'd like to learn from you." Because the grieving have great things to teach others.
Yeah. And how do you, when you arrive in a new country, is it something you try to bring? Because you said at the beginning how, people don't know that you're hurt. People don't know that you're broken. So would you advise to bring that topic as soon as possible when you meet people to make sure that they know? Because it's not their fault if they don't know.
Right, they don't know. Yeah, and I write about that in my first book, Global Mom, is that people don't know. If they weren't there writing the narrative, they have no idea that there's a part missing in the narrative. So you can't blame them. I always do a couple of things before I share this sort of, because it's treasure, it's sacred treasure. I always sort of say an inward prayer, to be honest with you, and I say, is this the right place, the right person, the right time for me to share this sort of thing? And sometimes I get sort of this clear feeling that says, yeah, you can do it. And sometimes the immediate answer is, don't do it right now. Don't share right now. What I do try to do, though, because you know this as a global nomad, and all of our listeners know this, when you're a new person on the block, the first question is, well, tell me about your family. Are these all your kids?
Mm.
Tell us about your oldest kids. So we've developed an entire method of responding to that most innocent, most well-meaning question. We start with the bottom of our kids. We start with the youngest. We say, oh, well, this is our youngest, and we tell all about him. Mm. And then we move up the ladder. We say, and this is our next child. We tell all about him. And then we get to the third child, and we tell all about her, and I try to get lost in the thicket of that big talk about that daughter, and I'm still testing to see whether they really want to know about the fourth child. Mm. Sometimes by then they've lost interest.
Interesting.
Sometimes, though, they'll say, but the fourth child, what about the fourth child? Mm. And again, if I say that inward prayer and I get that feeling it's safe and you should tell them, then I usually say, I'm very grateful that you asked that question. Mm. I'm going to answer it, and maybe you'll feel awkward, but please don't, because I want to answer that question. And then I tell in a brief way about this son, and I say him by name. I say, Parker is our oldest son, and here's what happened to Parker. And then I say, please don't ever feel that you can't mention his name. In fact, when you do mention his name, my heart sings. I want you to speak his name because he's very much a part of our lives still. We haven't tucked him away someplace. He's a part of our daily conversations, and he's very much alive for us. And so I do that. So we do that as a family, we've learned. My children are a little bit different. My children have had the experience that maybe they're not so safe sharing their brother with younger kids. Maybe kids are maybe not as capable. I don't know. I don't know if they're able to move into that sort of a deep region and talk about death. So my kids, sometimes I had one child that just denied having a brother for the longest time until it started making him sick. And then he found a way to share that story with others. And it varies from person to person. But for my husband and for myself, that's what we've done. We know that as soon as we move to a new place, people are going to ask, tell us about your family. And we start telling. And if they really have the endurance to get to that fourth child, then if we feel good about it, we tell the story. Sometimes we also say, if the setting isn't right, but we feel that the person would be receptive, then we say, oh, that's one of the most beautiful and sad stories that I can tell, and I want to tell you, but this isn't quite the place. If you want to know, let's ask another time. And people have actually come back and they've said, you were going to tell us about your son. Would you feel comfortable telling? And you know what, Amel? That's when some really extraordinary, really beautiful, I get teary just thinking about it. Some authentic human interaction takes place because whatever loss the other person has experienced, it connects them. It might have been their father. It might have been a grandfather, something. Mm-hmm. They connect. And then you're talking with the human in front of you and not just a person.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, Melissa, it's amazing. Thank you so much. I'm very emotional right now. So, thank you so much for sharing so openly and so generously, and thank you for sharing that, because I know and I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people. If there's one precious episode, I think it's this one. So thank you so much. And Nomad Nation, please check out Melissa's blog, Melissa Dalton-Bradford.wordpress.com, and also her 2 books. Melissa, would you like to mention your books, please?
Yes. So my blog's name is Melissa Rites of Passage. It's at WordPress, like you just mentioned. Melissa Rites, as in W-R-I-T-E-S.
Okay.
Melissa Rites of Passage. My first book is Global Mom, a Memoir. And the second book is On Loss and Living Onward. And both of them are available at your conventional online, and you can order them through conventional means.
Yeah,
and there's an audio version also. I narrate it So if you wanted to go on Amazon, there's an audio version of that as well.
Of which book, both or
of the first one, and I sing in it. I sing in my book right into the microphone.
Wonderful. So Nomad Nation, please check out Melissa's books and blog. And Melissa, again, I want to thank you again. I've done it already, but this is so precious to me, what you've shared with us today. And in a way, I also want to thank Parker, thanks to whom we've met and thanks to whom this is possible.
Thank you. I guess we'll just end in tears on that. That's beautiful.
So I can't, my thoughts goes to him, and thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you very much, Emma.